There is a reason why we don't get too many 3D action adventure games from indie developers or even AAA studios. Those are hard to do. There are exponentially more things to consider and polish compared to their 2D counterparts. So first and foremost, I want to commend Lienzo Studio, makers of Mulaka, for their second game in this genre and a significant leap forward in terms of gameplay and complexity compared to their previous title. This review is based on the PlayStation 4 review copy provided by the developer. Welcome to the channel. This is Reviews from the Void. Aztech Forgotten Gods is certainly an interesting game. I followed the development process and had really high hopes for it. And this was the hardest game I reviewed so far, because while it has plenty of great aspects, it's also filled by a number of noticeable downsides. So let's see how the positives and negatives stack up to each other as we score it. Graphics and sound. Unfortunately, graphics are the worst aspect of this game. The main problem here are the textures. I'm pretty sure you can find several games on the PlayStation 1 with overall better textures than this. Take a look. And listen, I am far from a graphics elitist or whatever. I can see merit in the simplest of them, but this is just abysmal, I'm sorry. And it's a shame because the designs for the structures are great, true to the historical inspirations, but taking a lot of freedom that fits the setting very well. I mean, look at how magnificent this Colosseum of sorts is. But once you get up close and personal, all the wonderment is replaced by aversion. And the ordinary citizen NPCs are even worse. It's hard to even see their face in this blurry mess, good grief. But there are redeeming factors to the graphics. Like I said, the designs are solid, and that's also true for the main character and a few other supporting characters. So the art design is there, but most of the execution falls really short. Graphics and sound is worth 2 points, one for graphics and one for sound. So I'll be transparent here that in graphics this gets a 0.3 out of 1. But fortunately, sound is a high note for Aztech Forgotten Gods. The music is great, with some really cool hard rock tracks, mixing electric guitar riffs with local folklore instruments for some interesting combinations. And the sound effects are perfectly fine too. The only issue I had here was with the voiceovers, or rather the groans. It's like Banjo and Kazooie, but without the cartoonish vibes. Just a bunch of sounds to convey a few emotions. And this type of game really benefits from actual voiceovers, so its absence here is really noticeable, especially since the conversations are many times rather long, so you get uncomfortable exchanges like this. Other than that, the music and sounds do a good job in compensating an otherwise very lacking presentation. So in the end, Aztech Forgotten Gods scored a 1.1 out of 2 in graphics and sound. Gameplay and challenge. This is where things get interesting, because this game has a bombastic gameplay. The main idea here is that with her oversized mechanical limb, the main character can thrust into the air and fly around for a really long time until her energy is drained, after which she will have to touch the ground and walls for a bit to replenish it. And I'm happy to say that the flying mechanics are fantastic. It feels really good, mainly due to the control scheme. If you press the thrust while pushing a direction, she will fly rapidly that that way, while if you don't press any direction, she points her hand downward to gain altitude. This is easy to use and provides a very interesting gameplay, especially because during battles, the enemies will force you to keep airborne as much as possible, as their attacks are many times unavoidable if you stay grounded. This is where the game shines the brightest, and it's the core of Aztech. The battles. They are usually in arenas and will have you figuring out what are the enemy's weaknesses and how to avoid their attacks. The boss fights are quite a spectacle. Your attacks are limited, she can basically only lunge forward for a punch or do a mega punch by holding another button, but there is a timed input aspect to the punching that makes it more interesting. Every time you attack, you will see a ring closing down and you can press the punch button again for extra damage or to do an execution against normal enemies. This is kinda cool actually, especially for boss fights. Flying around in town is also fun, and there are hidden collectibles to find, as well as two types of challenge trials. One is battles against normal enemies on a timer, very similar to Devil May Cry games, but unfortunately way less interesting because there aren't too many abilities and ways to combo, so you just end up button mashing and it doesn't feel great. And second, the races. Now these are cool, and again because flying has such a tight control scheme in this game, the races are quite enjoyable. You don't actually have to go faster than the opponent, but rather tail it as closely as possible, as if it gains too much distance, you fail. And that's pretty much it for gameplay in Aztech. Since the battle challenges are optional, this game gets quite a decent score on gameplay, and challenge doesn't lag behind either, as the boss fights are very creative and will require quick reflexes and pattern recognition on your side. The only problem I had on the challenge side is that the game fails to explain how things work, making it extra troublesome in the beginning, but the overall score here is very positive, 1.6 out of 2. Bang for buck. Aztech the Forgotten Gods comes out in March 10th, 2022 for PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One and Series, Switch and PCs through Steam, GOG and Epic. I'm afraid it's expensive though at $29.99, considering that the story will take you about 7 or 8 hours to complete, and a few more if you go for the side activities. There are 3 difficulties to tackle as well if you want to challenge yourself on hard mode, which helps a little. But this is far from a great bang for buck, as $29.99 is too much for this game's length and quality, so it gets a 1.1 out of 2 in this category. The sauce. The sauce are the less tangible aspects of a game, those that bind everything else together, giving the game its own identity, resulting in much more than the simple sum of their parts, for better or worse. In Aztech Forgotten Gods, the setting is a notable aspect, and actually one that made me interested in this game since the development. It takes place in a universe where the Americas were not conquered by European nations. As a Brazilian myself, this is quite a thought-provoking premise. They explore it very well, especially in the architecture of the city, with futuristic looking structures that still manage to keep the Aztec style with lots of stones and carvings. The main characters' designs and clothing also convey the same feelings. This makes the world of Aztec immediately more interesting. The story is also a positive, focusing on Aztec mythology and in the main character's trauma that manifests in her lack of confidence as well as in her claustrophobia. However, the dialogues between the characters are often way too long. If they had trimmed down the conversations, it would have been much better. Meanwhile, the level design in Aztec is also worth of a highlight. That's because it encompasses this one sprawling city with many landmarks as well as its neighboring areas in a similar way to the structure of the main area in God of War 2018 actually. It is quite a playground for the excellent traversal that this game has, inviting a lot of exploration with interesting places to visit and collectibles to find. Meanwhile, the battles take place in tight arenas, perfect for this game's combat style. So level design is certainly well made in Aztech Forgotten Gods. However, the gameplay loop is kind of weak, mostly because of the lack of a proper dungeon to go through while defeating regular enemies and maybe solving puzzles. The entire game feels much more like a boss rush than a regular adventure because of this. I don't have a problem with boss rushes, I quite enjoy them actually, but in the specific case of Aztec, it feels like there's something missing, especially because the fights against regular enemies soon become really dull. In the end, I do believe this game has more pros than cons, but not by a large margin at all, and this reflects on the sauce score of 2.6 out of 4. So Aztech Forgotten Gods gets a final score of 6.4 out of 10. Whenever I give scores on the 6s, I make sure to explain that anything above a 5 is a positive in my reviews. So 6.4 is actually a quite decent time for fans of action adventures, as long as they can look past the drawbacks, especially in the graphics, to enjoy the great gameplay that this game has. And I want to be clear that as an indie game, this is quite remarkable, but the scores take into consideration comparisons to all games in this genre, not only indies. These reviews are only made possible with your support, so thank you very much for subscribing, and I hope to see you soon.